Well, start recording now. Welcome, welcome. Be safe out there. We're trying to be safe. I know it's a lovely, lovely day out. And so maybe not the most populous for the lecture, but that's okay. We'll record it. And next week it's test time. We will have a test on ancient history through the First Amendment, and then we'll move on to the 19th century after that. So we will have the review for the test on Tuesday, and Thursday we'll have the actual test. Actually be online next Wednesday through Friday. So that's up and coming, right? Are you going to study? Nah, you don't have to do this. Anyway, so that's up and coming. Test next week, and I will announce that for those online only shortly. So we have one other thing we're doing this week, trying to make the First Amendment relevant. We'll really talk about it in depth today, but here's a discussion. 5 points just for participating. So, just do it. 5 points. And talk about one of these situations and how it should be decided according to First Amendment principles. Okay, one of them. Students reported sexual assaults to the police. When the student newspaper did not want to cover it, wanted to cover it, the administration says no, makes the school look bad. Is that legal to not cover sexual assault on campus? Second one, Duke University refused to give official recognition to the Christian group Cru. Many of you may be members thereof, because they deny the lesbian and gay people, LGBT people, they deny membership. The school says, if you're that kind of a group, we don't want to recognize you. Is that a denial of their free speech? Here's another one. UTC, white supremacist group, put up racist flyers during Black History Month. The school said the flyers needed to stay up, but in the right places because of free speech. Another one at UTC, student was running for student government, was chalking for Trump. And the Student Government Association said they didn't want her anymore. Is that right or wrong? Safety concerns, next one, at Beloit College in Wisconsin. Eric Prince of Blackwater, brother of Betsy DeVos, said, big conservative, was invited to campus. Protests came, they canceled it, the appearance, because of safety concerns. Well, that's right. Is that right or wrong? Here's one nearby, University of Alabama. The dean of students said that the American flag represents racism for my people. Police are part of that system. He's a person of color. Is it? And so he had to resign because he said that. Is that a denial of his free speech? Here in Harvard, a dean was defending Harvey Weinstein, the accused sexual assault guy. And so he lost his job as a dean. Here's another one. Student in Los Angeles, people were giving out the Constitution. but not in the right place. And the school said they can't be doing that. They should only do it in a free speech zone, a place where we allow free speech. Is that right or wrong? We have free speech zones at UTC, but we're online, so that's pretty moot. Maryland, during playing Duke, they had a t-shirts that said F Duke. The school says can't do that, shut down, throw away the t-shirts. Is that a denial of free speech? So, reply to one. How? That's what we'll talk about today. Here is the First Amendment. Remember from last time, the First Amendment is all about what the government can't do. They set up the government. The founders of this country set up the government in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. But these are the things that the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, are the things that the government cannot do. First time in the history of the world that we said you have limits. The first time we have limited government, that you have the freedom of these things beyond what the government can do. They can't stop you. Now, a private citizen, sure, you can limit the free speech in your own home or in your business. Someone wants to curse in my home and I don't like it, I can tell them to go away. Anyway, but the government cannot stop these things. First and foremost, we call it the Establishment Clause. No law respecting the establishment of a religion. What that means is anything that looks like there's a state religion, we will not do. Why? We come from the English tradition. England had civil wars between Catholics and Puritans and Church of England devotees for years and years. The Puritans chopped off the head of King Charles I. So we do not want to have a religious civil war. And by doing that, we're not going to have a state religion like England does, like France did, like Spain did. We are not going to have a state religion. Now, a lot of people say, hey, but this is a Christian nation. This is a nation that might have been created by Christians, but this is a non-religious country. We do not have a state religion. And when we talk about prayer in the schools, the Supreme Court says if the prayer is a Christian prayer, that smacks of a state religion. You can pray all you want yourself. If you don't like it, I understand that, but that's what the law says. It's the first part of the First Amendment. But you can exercise religion any way you want. The government won't stop you. You can pray, you can go to services. There was a court case where they allowed Rastafarians to smoke weed during their ceremonies, if that's part of your religion. Freedom of speech. Abridging freedom of speech, we will not do. Meaning, abridging is like if you have a dictionary, you have an abridged dictionary, you make it smaller. That means we're not going to make it smaller. You have a right of free speech that you are born with, and the government's not going to make it any smaller. So there are very few limits. And freedom of press, the only business in the Constitution. You can say whatever you want and make copies of it and spread it around. It just says free press. It does not say you have to be true or kind. You can lie. You could be hateful in the press. It doesn't have to be true or unbiased. You have a right to be biased. You have a right to be hateful. You have the right to offend people. That's what it means. The right of people to peaceably assemble. Don't, obviously, don't riot or vandalize, but to peaceably assemble. And this is the one that people forget: petition the government for a redress of grievances. You don't like something, you can talk to your congressman or councilman and say, hey, we want to do stuff better. Here's a little, come on. Here it comes.
U.S. Constitution. The First Amendment is one of the most important amendments to the Constitution, if not the most important. It reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. To learn more about the First Amendment, I talked to two experts. Erwin Chemerinsky is the Jesse H. Choper Distinguished Professor of Law and Dean of Berkeley Law. Michael McConnell is the Director of the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School and a Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. Professor Chemerinsky, there's a lot going on in the First Amendment. Can you tell us a little bit more about why the framers chose to protect these rights in particular?
The historical background of the First Amendment of the Constitution shows why the framers wanted to be sure that all of the liberties in the First Amendment were safeguarded. Let's focus on freedom of speech and freedom of the press. In England, there was, after the printing press developed, licensing, so that anyone who wanted to be able to publish anything needed to have a license from the government. Such licensing was seen to be inconsistent with freedom of speech, freedom of the press, for that matter, freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry.
Interesting. Okay, so there are a lot of essential freedoms that are packed into this First Amendment, so much that it's almost amazing that we're going to attempt to talk about them all in one video. But if we dial into freedom of speech, Professor McConnell, what is freedom of speech? Does that encompass some things and not others?
Well, freedom of speech was actually less important to the framers than the freedom with which it was coupled, which is the freedom of the press. And the reason for this is that speech that can reach large audiences is much more important to the individual, but also dangerous to the state than mere speech. When you speak, only those people within hearing range can hear you. But when you are able to use Gutenberg's fantastic new technology to publish your sentiments and distribute them widely, maybe even over the entire country or across the Atlantic and reaching hundreds and thousands of people, now that is powerful. And no wonder, so you think about how the American Revolution was won. This required spreading the word. It required gaining converts and telling people what their grievances were. To a very great extent, this was done through the mechanism of the printing press.
When you ask the question of what's freedom of speech, there's implicit within it the issue of what do we mean by speech? Ultimately, the answer to your question is that the First Amendment in protecting speech broadly safeguards a right to express one's ideas, but it's not absolute. The government can restrict expression if there's a compelling interest.
Interesting. Can you say more about that?
The Supreme Court always has been clear that freedom of speech is not absolute. The court.
There you go. There are always limits. You can only go so far. As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, you cannot say fire in a crowded theater.
Said that there are certain categories of speech that are unprotected by the First Amendment. Incitement of illegal activity is a category of unprotected speech. The court has said this requires showing that the speech was directed at causing imminent illegal activity, and there was a substantial likelihood of imminent illegal activity. Another example, obscenity is unprotected by the First Amendment. The court struggled for years with trying to define what is obscenity. Maybe the low point in that is when Justice Potter Stewart said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. There are also these categories of speech where the government can prohibit, even punish the expression.
That's where most of the limitations on the freedom of speech and of the press come from, is in order to make sure that we don't hurt other people's rights through the use of our own. So an example of that.
Also, when speech becomes action, we can limit you. You can say, I want to punch you in the face. But when you do punch somebody in the face, it's assault.
The government can prohibit speech which incites violence against someone. So if you're making a speech and calling upon the crowd to attack somebody's house or their person, that can be punished and prevented as an incitement to.
And this is what is ongoing, and this is why we had hearings and an impeachment trial a couple of weeks ago, because this is exactly what the question was of what happened on January 6th.
Violence, and you can see how that follows from the logical idea of freedom of speech being a natural right and therefore limited by the rights of other people.
So let's turn our attention toward the freedom of religion part of the First Amendment. So the first thing that the amendment says is about establishment. So what does this establishment clause prevent?
The language of the First Amendment is important. It says that Congress may make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Since 1947, the Supreme Court has said that it also applies to state and local governments. And the Supreme Court has said this means that the government cannot act with the purpose of advancing religion.
To the founders, this is a very clear legal concept, namely it was the established Church of England. In the statute books, in the law, the Church of England was referred to as, and I quote, the church by law established. And what did it mean to be established? First of all, it meant that the doctrines of the church, the 39 articles of faith of the Church of England, were voted upon by Parliament. So the doctrines, the liturgy, the text were all adopted by law. The established church was the government's church, and it could be used, and from time to time was used, as an instrument of government or as an instrument of politics. And this is a way in which the government is able to have a powerful influence on the way in which values and opinions are inculcated. It's one of the most important ideas of the established church, especially in the 18th century, was to teach that there's actually a religious obligation to obey the law and to recognize the king as the supreme leader in matters of both church and state. And the framers' experience with this was extremely powerful.
That's because the framers were aware of the religious persecution that had gone on in other countries. They were aware of the evils that occur when the government becomes aligned with a particular.
Yeah, look at today in Iran, where the official state religion is Islam. And if you speak out, and the leader of Iran is an imam. And if you speak out against him, it's off with your head. And we don't want to be Iran.
Religion.
The principal reason why many of the colonists had come to these shores to begin with was to escape the oppressions of the established Church of England back home and to come to a place where they would be able to exercise the freedom of religion for themselves. And the main opponents of the established church were not anti-Christian or anti-religious people. They were the most religious people, and their view was the government should stay out of our church, that we will decide what we believe for ourselves. We will control our own church. We will write our own liturgy. We'll decide what version of the Bible we're going to use. We'll choose our own ministers. Thank you very much, government. Stay out of it. Leave
There you go.
us free to practice our religion without having this kind of an establishment.
There you go. And that's the point. So those are the big things in the First Amendment.
So for instance, a county in Kentucky,
All right. A little bit more.
It's guaranteed in writing. First Amendment. Government can't touch these. Religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Congress may not favor one religion over another. Limit the free exercise of religion. Exceptions allow government regulation of certain practices, human sacrifice, drug use, etc. Congress may not curtail the freedom of speech, restrict freedom of the press. Exceptions include regulation of obscenity, fighting words, advocating illegal action, and commercial.
When we talk about commercial speech, meaning that you can say what you want about your product, but you can't defraud or hurt people with your lies.
Speech. Congress may not prohibit peaceful assembly and petition of the government. Exceptions allow regulations to address social concerns, time, place, and manner of
Time, place, and manner. You, again, free speech zones. You can protest on campus, but at a certain time, a certain place, and a certain manner.
protest. Taken together, First Amendment freedoms protect self-expression,
Yeah,
personal, social, and political.
that's what it's about. By the way, that was from Voice of America. That is for potential immigrants to this country. Some thoughts, some other time. What do they mean? Okay. Now, a lot of folks, when they look at the First Amendment and how to interpret something like prayer in the schools, you look at what the framers really meant when they wrote it. The truth of the matter is they look upon it as a concept. Could the framers of the Constitution envision porn? Not the kind of porn that we might have today. So, you know, there are some things I couldn't think of. This is the one things they do agree on. No prior restraint, which means prior restraint is censoring before you print something. The government is not going to license your printing press. They are not going to censor something. Now, if you do something bad, if you libel somebody or cause a riot, you can get prosecuted after the fact, but the government is not going to stop beforehand. Why? Because the government's not going to decide what's good and bad. That is for us to decide. Now, Does that mean you could say anything? No. The Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, passed by people who wrote the Constitution and oversaw by John Adams, allowed you to put people in jail if they didn't like you. If the Alien and Sedition Act says, oh, it's sedition to speak out against the president. Our last president would have loved to do that pretty often in the press. So it's still, you know, what did they really mean? They weren't sure. It was a concept, and it's something we're still wrestling with. What are the meanings? What is the meanings in society? What is speech, and how do we limit over time? That's why I gave you a whole series of incidents where that's a valid question. So look at it, think about it, just respond to one, and you get 5 points. Next week, we are going to have the test. Da, 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 da. So I will review for the test from the beginning of time to the First Amendment next Tuesday. Questions on any of this? All right, I will make the recording. You enjoy your lovely day out. Have a great time. Puppy and I are going to a crawfish boil later on. Have a great day, guys.
All right, you too. Enjoy.
Thank you. You too.